The room was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, as Dr. Clark's words echoed in her mind, each one sinking deeper than the last. "I'm sorry, but the treatment isn't working. There's nothing more we can do." The walls seemed to close in around her, the stark white of the hospital room suddenly too bright, too suffocating. Her hands trembled as she reached for the edge of the counter, gripping it for support, her breath shallow. She felt the weight of the words pressing against her chest, crushing her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back, determined not to fall apart in front of the doctor. But inside, she was unraveling. Her world, her hopes, her dreams, her future, was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her mind raced, searching for a solution that wasn't there, grasping for hope that had already been stripped away. Sarah felt like a shell of herself, empty, lost, and powerless. This was the moment that would change everything, the moment that would alter her life forever. And all she could do was stand there, motionless, as the finality of the situation settled over her like a heavy fog. Sarah's mind was reeling as she sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, doing little to calm her racing heart. She could feel the weight of the doctor's words still pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. A part of her wanted to scream, to argue that there had to be something more they could do, but another part of her just wanted to sit in silence, numb to everything around her. The waiting room, though full of strangers, felt eerily quiet, like the world outside had somehow stopped moving. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she felt so small. She reached for her phone, desperate for something, anything to distract her from the pit of despair she found herself sinking into. Her hands shook as she unlocked the screen, scrolling through the messages from family and friends, none of them knowing what was really going on. How could they? She hadn't told anyone about the diagnosis yet. She hadn't had the courage to admit it to herself, let alone to them. How could she tell them that the life she had worked so hard to build was crumbling, slipping away like sand through her fingers? How could she explain that the future she had dreamed of was no longer possible? The hospital's ticking clock seemed louder now, each second stretching longer than the last. Sarah's eyes drifted toward the exit, a glimmer of light shining through the glass doors, a small slice of freedom from this never-ending nightmare. But the thought of walking out, leaving the sterile hospital behind, was impossible. There was no escaping the truth. She had tried to outrun it for so long, but now it was here, standing in front of her like an insurmountable wall. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, pushing the air from her lungs. She took a shallow breath and closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing thoughts. How had everything gone so wrong? The treatments, the endless doctor's appointments, the hope she had clung to for months. All of it was slipping through her fingers. What had she done wrong? Was she not strong enough? It felt as though the universe had conspired against her, leaving her in this unbearable limbo between hope and despair. The harsh sound of footsteps pulled her back to reality. A nurse appeared at the doorway, her gaze soft and sympathetic, but it did nothing to ease the storm inside Sarah. The nurse's words were drowned out by the deafening silence in Sarah's mind. "It's time," she said. But Sarah wasn't ready. She wasn't ready for any of this. The nurse's words cut through the air like glass shattering. Sarah slowly stood, each step feeling heavier than the last. It was as if the floor beneath her had turned to quicksand, pulling her deeper into a place she couldn't escape. She followed the nurse down the hallway, each footstep echoing in the silence, a rhythmic reminder that time was running out. She passed rooms filled with other patients, each one a story of struggle and survival, and yet none of it seemed real. Her mind was far from here, lost in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She couldn't focus on anything but the thoughts racing in her head. The weight of the news she had just received gnawed at her, relentless and suffocating. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to face what was coming next. As they approached the examination room, the nurse opened the door and gestured for Sarah to enter. The room was small, sterile, and cold, with bright fluorescent lights that seemed to burn into her skin. There, at the center, was a chair, a place she had to sit. But she couldn't bring herself to sit. She felt rooted to the spot, too afraid to move, too afraid to face what was coming next. The nurse left her alone for a moment, and Sarah was left standing in the middle of the room, her hands trembling at her sides. Sarah's heart raced as she took a tentative step into the room. The air felt thick with tension, every breath harder to take than the last. She finally sat down in the chair, her body still stiff, her mind lost in a haze of disbelief. The nurse returned a moment later, and Sarah's eyes were drawn to the chart the nurse was carrying. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, thudding loudly against the quiet. The nurse sat across from her, flipping open the chart, and Sarah's eyes flitted to the open page for a brief moment. She didn't need to read the words to know what they meant. They were written in the spaces between the lines, in the way the nurse avoided her gaze, in the way her fingers hovered over the page before gently turning it. Sarah's stomach twisted as she realized that this was it. This was the moment that everything changed. There was no coming back from this. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, until the nurse spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your options," she said, though the words felt hollow. Sarah nodded, though she didn't know if she was acknowledging the nurse or the unbearable weight pressing down on her. Her vision blurred, and she closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound of her own breath, the sound of the world closing in around her. The hours passed in a blur. Sarah sat alone in her small apartment, the dim light from the window casting long shadows across the room. Her mind kept replaying the words the doctor had said. "There's nothing more we can do." It was a constant echo, a haunting reminder of the reality she had to face. She felt like a passenger in her own life, disconnected from the world around her. The weight of the diagnosis pressed heavily on her, yet the world outside seemed to carry on without her. Her phone remained silent, no messages or calls, just an empty screen staring back at her. She wanted to reach out, to tell someone, anyone, but how could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? A part of her felt angry, betrayed even, as if her body had turned against her in the cruelest way. But another part of her felt numb, like she was simply going through the motions of her life, waiting for it all to end. Then, without warning, the doorbell rang. It was her best friend, Emily, standing in the doorway with a concerned look on her face, holding a bag of groceries. Emily had always been the one to show up unannounced, her presence a constant in Sarah's turbulent world. But today, Sarah didn't know how to let her in, emotionally or physically. She stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say or how to act. Emily stepped inside, her cheerful demeanor immediately clashing with the heaviness in the air. She set the grocery bag down on the counter and turned to Sarah, her eyes full of concern. "Hey, I brought your favorite snacks," Emily said with a soft smile, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah managed a weak smile in return, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks," Sarah whispered, her voice sounding hoarse, as though she hadn't spoken in days. Emily sat beside her, sensing the tension in the room. She didn't push Sarah to talk, but her presence was a comfort nonetheless. Sarah felt the weight of the silence grow between them, and for a moment she wished she could open up, tell Emily everything. But how could she? How could she explain the feelings of fear and helplessness that gripped her every waking moment? The silence stretched on, but Emily didn't mind. She'd always known how to be there for Sarah without needing to say much. But still, the unspoken words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. We're in this together." A few hours passed before Sarah finally broke the silence. She had tried to keep it in, to hold on to the illusion that everything would be okay. But Emily's presence, her warmth made it impossible to keep up the facade. "I don't know how to do this," Sarah confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The words came out choked, as though they had been trapped inside her for far too long. "I don't know how to fight this." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she simply took Sarah's hand in hers, her fingers warm and steady. Sarah's heart ached as she felt the weight of Emily's touch, the silent promise that no matter how bad things got, she wouldn't have to face it alone. It wasn't much, but it was everything Sarah needed in that moment. "You don't have to fight this alone," Emily finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "You just have to let us help you." Sarah's tears began to fall, slowly at first, then more rapidly, as the dam she had built up over the past few days finally broke. Emily didn't try to stop her. Instead, she pulled Sarah into a tight embrace, holding her as she cried. In that moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel the pain she had been avoiding, the grief she had been trying to outrun. And for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. The next few days felt like a blur. Sarah didn't remember much about the time after Emily left, but she knew she wasn't as alone as she had felt before. Emily kept checking in, always reminding her that she was there. But despite the comfort Emily provided, Sarah still felt the ache in her chest, the fear that never seemed to leave. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could make it through. It wasn't that the diagnosis was any less terrifying, it was still looming over her every moment. But with Emily's support, it felt like the weight wasn't as unbearable. One evening, Sarah found herself sitting at the small kitchen table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The light from the overhead bulb cast a warm glow, and the quiet hum of the fridge filled the silence. The stillness of the apartment felt almost comforting now, like it had become a refuge. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that she could handle whatever came next. That night, Sarah went to bed earlier than usual, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past few days. As she lay in the darkness, the cool sheets against her skin, she thought about all the people who loved her. Emily, her family, her friends, people who cared about her, even when she felt undeserving. It was hard to reconcile the feeling of being unworthy of their love with the knowledge that they would continue to stand by her. But as she closed her eyes and let the silence settle around her, she felt a faint sense of peace. She wasn't sure how to explain it, but for the first time she wasn't terrified of the future. The road ahead would be difficult, but she had the strength to face it. It might not be easy, but with the support of the people who loved her, she knew she could keep going. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days began to blend together as Sarah struggled to manage the unrelenting tide of emotions. Her physical health was deteriorating, but it was the mental toll that really weighed on her. She hadn't been able to keep up with work, falling behind on projects she once excelled at. At night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold. The fear of the unknown was suffocating, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was fine. Emily had noticed the change in Sarah, but every time she asked, Sarah pushed her away, too proud to admit how much she was struggling. The facade was starting to crack, and no matter how hard she tried to hold it together, the pieces of her life were slipping through her fingers. The weight of her illness, coupled with the stress of trying to maintain normalcy, was taking a toll on every aspect of her life. She had a moment of clarity one afternoon when she stared at the unopened bills piling up on the kitchen counter. The mounting debt was a reminder of her growing financial strain. There was no denying it any longer. She was sinking, and she didn't know how to pull herself out. Everything was piling up, the medical costs, the late-night thoughts, the shame of relying on others. Her exhaustion, physical and emotional, was catching up with her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly overwhelmed. Sarah's mind was spiraling, and every moment seemed to make her anxiety worse. She began to avoid her friends, avoiding social media, and even ignoring Emily's calls. The sense of isolation grew stronger by the day, as she felt like a burden to everyone around her. Emily had tried reaching out, but Sarah would either dodge her calls or offer quick, unconvincing excuses. One afternoon, Sarah decided to go for a walk in the park, hoping the fresh air would help clear her mind. She pulled on a jacket and walked aimlessly, her footsteps loud against the quiet path. The trees above her rustled softly in the wind, but her mind was miles away. She passed families playing, couples walking hand in hand, and joggers moving quickly by her. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel out of place, like an intruder in a world that was carrying on without her. Her chest tightened as she thought of her son, who was staying with her mother while she focused on her treatment. She had always prided herself on being a good mother, but now she wondered if she was failing him. The guilt wrapped itself tightly around her heart, squeezing out any joy she could have felt in the moment. Every step felt heavier, and soon she found herself standing still, watching a group of children laughing together. Their innocence, their joy, reminded her of a time before everything had changed. A time when she felt like she had control. The weight of guilt continued to plague Sarah. She tried to push it away, but it lingered, following her wherever she went. Every time she looked at her son's photo, every time she saw his toys scattered around her apartment, the feeling grew stronger. She couldn't shake the thought that she was failing him, that she was too weak to be the mother he deserved. She had always promised herself that she would be there for him, that no matter what, she would always be strong for him. But now, with her health declining and her finances in disarray, it felt like she was breaking the promise. Her mind wandered to the future, a future she couldn't picture anymore. She didn't know how much longer she would have with him, and the thought of leaving him without a mother, without the security and love she had always tried to give, made her feel hollow inside. That night, she lay awake in bed, her thoughts a whirlpool of regret and uncertainty. Emily had offered help, offered to stay with her, but Sarah had pushed her away, afraid to burden anyone else with her problems. She couldn't let anyone see her weakness, not even the people who loved her. She felt isolated, like there was no escape from the relentless storm inside her. The next day, Emily knocked on Sarah's door, not leaving until Sarah finally opened it. Emily's words, "I'm not going to let you do this alone," broke through Sarah's fear, and for the first time in days, she felt relief. Emily embraced her, offering no answers but comfort, letting Sarah cry. In that moment, Sarah realized that surviving wasn't about fixing everything. It was about taking things one day at a time, with the support of those who loved her. As the days passed, Sarah opened up more to Emily, sharing her fears and doubts. With Emily's patient support, Sarah started to find peace, realizing she wasn't as alone as she had thought. Though still uncertain of the future, Sarah began to believe that small steps forward, with Emily by her side, were enough to keep going. Sarah had begun to feel a sense of stability, but everything shifted when a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from her ex-husband, Mark, a man she hadn't heard from in years. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the first line. "I know what happened to your son." The words echoed in her mind, leaving her stunned. How could he know? What did he mean? Their son's illness had been a mystery, and Sarah had always assumed it was just bad luck, something she could never explain. But now, a new possibility was on the horizon. She wasn't sure if she wanted to know what Mark was referring to, but curiosity gnawed at her. Could the illness be something more? Something deliberate? Her hands shook as she folded the letter back up, her thoughts spiraling into confusion and fear. The past was resurfacing, and she wasn't prepared to confront it. It had been years since she and Mark parted ways, but there were still many unanswered questions about their time together. Sarah knew the truth could tear everything apart, but she also knew she couldn't ignore it. Sarah's mind raced with questions, none of which she could answer. Her instincts told her to ignore the letter, to push it aside, and pretend it never happened. But another part of her knew she had to face the truth, no matter how painful. She spent hours pacing her apartment, trying to make sense of the possibilities. Was Mark telling the truth? Could he be behind this? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed plausible. Mark had always been unpredictable, volatile even, and their relationship had been filled with unresolved tension. Maybe this was his way of making her pay for the past. But then, a nagging thought surfaced. What if it wasn't just about him? What if someone else was involved, someone from her past she had long forgotten? She couldn't dismiss the feeling that something darker was at play here. Sarah knew that confronting Mark would only lead to more pain, but she couldn't ignore the letter any longer. She needed answers, no matter the cost. Mark finally called. His voice on the other end of the line was distant, almost cold. "You need to know what I did," he said. His words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She tried to prepare herself for whatever revelation was coming, but nothing could prepare her for what he was about to say. "I never meant for him to get hurt," Mark continued, his tones soft but laced with guilt. "I thought it was the only way." Sarah's heart raced. She could barely comprehend what he was saying. Was he admitting guilt? Was he confessing to something unimaginable? "I didn't know the effect it would have, but I'm the reason your son got sick," Mark said, his voice breaking. The truth hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah's world tilted as she realized that everything she had believed to be true might have been a lie. Mark wasn't just a part of her past, he was responsible for the present nightmare. Confession hit Sarah like a freight train. Her thoughts scattered in every direction, none of them making sense. She wanted to scream, to shout at Mark, to demand an explanation, but her voice was lost in the chaos inside her head. "Why?" was all she could manage to say. Mark's response was soft, almost apologetic. "I thought I was doing the right thing. It was supposed to make everything better, but I was wrong. I'm sorry." The words felt hollow, empty. How could he say he was sorry when he had caused so much pain? "You can't just apologize for something like this," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. She felt betrayed, violated by the man she had once trusted. The anger, the sorrow, it all came crashing down on her at once. The truth was worse than she could have ever imagined, and it was tearing her apart. She needed to confront Mark, needed to make him understand the damage he had done. But even as she prepared for the confrontation, part of her wondered if it was too late for redemption. The confrontation with Mark loomed over Sarah for days, filling her with dread. She knew that she had to face him, but a part of her feared what would happen next. The anger inside her burned, but it was accompanied by an overwhelming sadness. She felt as though the life she had built, the fragile sense of peace she had finally begun to find, was all an illusion. Mark had shattered that illusion, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. When the day came for her to meet him, she was a bundle of nerves. She arrived at the agreed location, a small cafe downtown, and saw him sitting at a table, his head down, avoiding her gaze. He looked older, smaller than she remembered. As she approached, her heart raced, and her breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment that could change everything. But when she finally sat down across from him, all the anger she had expected to feel seemed to evaporate. Instead, there was only an aching sadness, and the realization that the man she had once loved was no longer the person she had thought him to be. Sarah sat across from Mark, the weight of the silence between them heavy and suffocating. Every word felt like it had to carry the truth, but nothing could prepare her for the depth of the anger and hurt she was feeling. She stared at him, trying to find the man she once loved, but all she saw was a stranger, a man who had made decisions that had destroyed her world. "You're the reason my son's sick," Sarah said, her voice breaking barely above a whisper. "How could you do this?" Mark's face twisted with guilt, but the apology on his lips felt insincere, as if he was only sorry because it was expected. "I didn't think it would hurt him. I thought I was helping Sarah. I never meant for this to happen," Mark pleaded, his voice shaky. Sarah's chest tightened as his words seemed to drain the strength from her body. She wanted to lash out, to scream, but the tears came instead. She had spent years blaming herself, and now, the man who had once been her partner was the one responsible for the nightmare. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her son's face flashed before her, a face she had promised to protect. "You didn't think," she whispered through clenched teeth. "That's the problem." Mark's words hit like a slap, but Sarah couldn't let herself fall apart now. She had to focus. Her son needed her, and this betrayal, though devastating, couldn't consume her. "I trusted you," she said, her voice trembling. "I let you in, and this is what you did." Mark's face twisted with regret, his shoulders sagging, as though he was carrying an immense weight. "I never meant for any of this. I thought I was doing the right thing." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was already racing toward the next steps, how to fix this, how to protect her son. She was done, feeling helpless. Her fists clenched as the realization hit her. Mark's apology didn't matter. What mattered was what she was going to do next. The anger that had been simmering inside her finally bubbled over. "You can't fix this," she spat. "But I can protect him." Mark looked up, his eyes pleading, but Sarah stood up, cutting him off. She wasn't going to stay here and listen to more empty words. She had to find a way to make this right, for her son. Sarah returned home, her mind swirling with confusion, anger, and fear. The evening had grown dark, but it did little to calm her nerves. She sat in the living room, staring at the photo of her son, trying to find the strength she needed to make a decision. It felt like her whole world was falling apart. Her health, her son, her life. But she couldn't let it break her. She thought of the small victories she had achieved, the support from Emily, the love of her son, the strength she had found in herself. She had survived this long. She could survive whatever came next. The confrontation with Mark had been a catalyst, one that finally pushed her to the edge. She was no longer going to be a passive participant in her life. "I have to do something," she said to herself, her voice low, but determined. The first step would be confronting her past, but after that, she wasn't sure. She had to be ready for anything. But what she knew for sure was this: she would protect her son, no matter the cost. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the hospital, her heart racing in her chest. She had an appointment to discuss her son's treatment options, but it felt like a meeting with destiny. She didn't know what she would hear, but she knew it was time to take charge of everything. The hospital doors loomed before her, but as she stepped through them, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. Her son's future was at stake. She had to make the right decision. As she sat in the sterile waiting room, her thoughts raced. Emily had told her to trust her instincts, but what if her instincts were wrong? What if she made the wrong choice for her son? The weight of the decision pressed down on her. But as the nurse called her name, Sarah stood up, determined to face whatever came next. She wasn't going to let fear control her any longer. It was time to take control for her son's sake. The appointment was difficult, filled with medical jargon and impossible decisions. But Sarah held her ground, asking the hard questions, refusing to let the doctors make her feel powerless. They gave her options, but none of them felt like the right answer. It was a long and draining conversation, but at the end of it, Sarah walked out of the hospital with a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. She didn't have all the answers, but she was beginning to understand that there wasn't one perfect solution. The future was uncertain, but she wasn't going to let fear paralyze her. As she walked back to her car, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She still had a long road ahead, but now, for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Sarah knew she couldn't change the past, but she could change the future. And that was enough to give her hope. The weeks following Sarah's decision felt like a blur. She focused all her energy on her son, working tirelessly to help him through the treatment process. It wasn't easy, and every day felt like a battle. But slowly, Sarah began to see glimmers of hope. Her son was responding to the treatment in ways the doctors hadn't expected. His energy was returning, his laughter filling their home once again. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to believe in the possibility of recovery. She was learning to trust in the process, to embrace the small victories. Still, fear lingered in the back of her mind, and she had moments of doubt. What if it wasn't enough? What if the disease came back? But then she would look at her son, see his smile, and remember that they had come this far together. The battle wasn't over, but Sarah was no longer facing it alone. The weight of her past began to lift, piece by piece. She had fought for her family, and she would keep fighting, no matter what. Emily's support never wavered. She visited often, helping Sarah with her son's care, but also offering emotional support when Sarah felt herself slipping. The bond they shared had grown stronger over time, and Sarah knew that she wouldn't have made it through without her. "You're doing amazing, Sarah," Emily would tell her, and though Sarah often didn't feel strong, Hearing those words gave her the strength to keep going. Emily wasn't just a friend, she was family. And as they spent time together, Sarah realized that healing wasn't just about the physical recovery. It was about rebuilding herself, piece by piece. Emily had helped her see that. When they weren't dealing with treatment or medication schedules, they found moments of peace, sitting together in the kitchen, laughing over old memories, or taking short walks in the park. These moments became precious reminders that life was more than just surviving. It was about cherishing the small, beautiful moments that made everything worth it. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself slowly gaining back the strength she had lost. Her son's recovery was a miracle, and the joy in his eyes was a constant reminder of why she had fought so hard. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she was starting to rebuild. She had learned to accept that some things were beyond her control, but that didn't mean she couldn't still make a difference. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, her son asked her, "Are we going to be okay?" Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Yes," she replied, holding his hand. "We are going to be just fine." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time Sarah felt ready to face it. Whatever happened, they had each other, and that was enough to give her hope. The next few months brought a sense of normalcy that Sarah hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. She returned to her job, though with a newfound perspective. The work that once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable, and she no longer took it for granted. She learned to balance her life differently, prioritizing time with her son, making space for self-care, and recognizing when she needed help. Emily remained a constant in her life, her presence a reminder that she didn't have to carry the weight of everything alone. Sarah had been broken, but now she was healing piece by piece, day by day. She had learned that recovery wasn't linear. It was messy, uncertain, and sometimes painful. But it was possible. She had fought for her family and herself, and in doing so, she had discovered a strength within her that she never knew existed. One quiet evening, Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset with her son by her side. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. They had been through so much together, but they had come out stronger on the other side. Sarah realized that she had been given a second chance. A chance to appreciate the life she had, and the people who loved her. She no longer felt burdened by the weight of her past. Instead, she embraced it as part of her story, a story that was still being written. "We're okay, aren't we?" her son asked, his voice soft but filled with hope. Sarah smiled, her heart full. "We're more than okay," she replied, looking out at the horizon. "We're going to be just fine." Sarah felt the weight of her journey lifting. Her son's recovery, the support of Emily, and her own strength had led her to this peaceful moment. Though the future was uncertain, she now faced it with hope, knowing she had the power to shape it. Walking in the park with Emily, Sarah acknowledged her growth. "I couldn't have done this alone," Sarah said. Emily's support had been vital, helping her rediscover hope. Life felt lighter now, filled with small moments of joy and strength. Watching her son laugh, Sarah realized they had overcome the hardest part. The future still held unknowns, but with love, patience, and courage, she knew they'd be okay. "Yes, we're more than okay," Sarah whispered, embracing the moment. Sarah knew the future wasn't predictable, but with Emily's support and her son's recovery, she felt ready for whatever came. Standing on the balcony that night, she realized she had the strength to face anything ahead. The morning brought clarity. Watching her son laugh with friends, Sarah felt grateful for the second chance at life. The past didn't define her anymore, and as she watched her son, she realized she was exactly where she needed to be.